Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, brought to you in partnership with Ciphr. My name is Catherine Newbury, and I'm the multi-channel editor at People Management. During today's webinar, we'll explore how HR can implement more effective diversity strategies and the impact of those strategies across all areas of an organisation. With 1 in 4 HR professionals we surveyed claiming that diversity in their organisation could be improved, this is clearly a hot topic at the moment. During the next hour, we'll tackle how to move beyond a focus on compliance with the law, why diversity and inclusion should be embedded in the DNA of your organisation, why diversity initiatives fail without a focus on inclusion, the broader benefits of an effective approach to diversity and inclusion, and how to tackle the challenges that come with having a more diverse workforce. In this webinar, our speakers will be addressing the importance of diversity in the workforce, effective methods for promoting it, and practical ways that you can handle it. If you miss anything, don't worry, this webinar will be available to watch on demand shortly after the live broadcast. So joining us today, first up is Danny Kalman. Danny, could you tell everyone a little about yourself, please?
Yes, good morning, and thanks very much for the opportunity to really share my passion and also my experiences of what I believe is a very important topic. My corporate life ended about 4 years ago. I was 21 years with Panasonic, and a lot of my focus was on talent management, and my last position in Panasonic was Global Head of Talent. And since leaving Panasonic, I had the honour and privilege actually to be involved in writing a book with Steve Frost. Steve's background is diversity and inclusion. My background is talent, and by putting those two together, we wrote a book, Inclusive Talent Management, which was published last year. So during this next hour or so, I'd like to share some of the experiences involved in writing the book.
Thanks, Danny. It's great to have you and your expertise with us today. And also with us is Laura Popazzi, who was recently honoured with an award for effective implementation of a diversity programme, which was enabled and supported by the Ciphr HR system. She'll be sharing her experiences with us today. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. My background is in corporate responsibility. I've worked across a number of organisations over the last few years, and now I'm Head of Diversity and Talent at Southbank Centre, which, for those of you who don't know, is a registered charity, and we're UK's largest arts centre that runs about 5,000 events a year for the public.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to have you with us. Over the next hour, we'll hear a presentation from Danny, followed by a wide-ranging conversation between Danny and Laura about diversity and inclusion. I'll be putting your questions to them both as we go along, so please send them through to us using the form you can see on your screen. Don't forget to share your comments, tips and experiences with us as well, and I'll read out as many as I can. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to take part in our first poll question. It will be left open for around 10 minutes or so while we're running through Danny's presentation, so you can have plenty of time to answer it. So the question is, how well do you feel your organisation is handling and promoting diversity? Got a couple of options here: very well, adequately, or not very well. Danny, while we're waiting for people to cast their vote, what do you think the results might turn out to be?
Well, Catherine, if your survey kind of mirrors the results you found, probably will find out that most HR people or people who are kind of dialing in today will, to some extent, maybe satisfied, but really, how many people will say, really, it's brilliant, the kind of work my organisation is doing? I'll be very surprised to see that. I think it was in your same poll, I think it was about 10% who said that they felt their organisation was doing an excellent job. But as you said, 1 in 4 probably feel it could be more effective. So I'm probably thinking it's going to be probably around number 2. The majority of people will say effective, but could do better.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Danny. So I'm going to hand over to you now for your presentation to tell us a bit more about some of the challenges of promoting diversity at work. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Perhaps we can go to the first slide. This is kind of a hashtag that we've used in talking about the book and doing a number of kind of webinars and talks within companies. And really, the starting point is we say diversity is reality, inclusion is a choice. And I think many organizations kind of feel, yes, they have a diverse workforce. That's whether within gender or ethnicity, of course, generational diversity, people with disabilities, etc. So, diversity is recognised within organisations, but the kind of question is, to what extent is that diversity leveraged? To what extent are businesses taking advantage of having a diverse workforce? And so that's the reason we say, it's their diversity, but how inclusive are you, and how inclusive do you want to be? And by understanding what are the benefits to be inclusive within the organisation, where everybody's perspectives, everybody's views are shared and valued. And really, by having this inclusive working environment, that's where organisations have seen some benefit from a business point of view, which I'd like to actually pick up during the next few minutes. So next slide, please. It's no doubt that we're all addicted to sameness, or all addicted to likeness. And, I'll do a very quick exercise showing in-groups and out-groups. For those of you who have signed in, listening now, or perhaps later, if you could picture your kind of 4 to 5 closest friends, people that you've either grown up with, people that you're very familiar with, people that you go to for advice or for guidance. And then you also kind of think about your 3 to 4 colleagues at work, who again you feel very close to and you can confide in, etc. Then think about your partner and the community you're in. And if you draw a circle around, the people who are your closest friends, the people who you go to at work, your partner, community, etc., that's your in-group. And that's the kind of frame that we make decisions based around this in-group. And I would imagine that many of you, when you think about or visualize those people in the in-group, this will kind of mirror this addiction to the people like us, because we feel very comfortable by talking, by referring and getting views of this kind of in-group. If we then challenge ourselves and thinking about our out-group, people that maybe we don't necessarily go to or are drawn to within the organizations because they're a different age group, maybe they come from a different culture, different background, etc. And so real inclusion is when we start actually challenging ourselves and saying, okay, let's try to get some views and comments from people we don't necessarily listen to. Maybe we should be listening to a different media or a different newspaper, but just challenging the views that we tend to be influenced by, and therefore challenging ourselves to go to our out group. The next slide, please. So if we look at this kind of ITM, Inclusive Talent Management framework, the research that we did, we found that in some organizations today, there is their talent or HR department or department which looks at learning, development and talent, sometimes is quite separate from a section or people that are looking at equality or diversity and inclusion. So what we're saying in the book is very much in order to be able to achieve an inclusive workforce and inclusive culture, that's got to be a strong link between leadership, talent management and diversity and inclusion. And the argument that we put is by underpinning every decision you make around talent, and that could be recruiting people, developing people, retention, and of course, finally, leadership, underpinning through a lens of diversity and inclusion. So very, very much putting a business case to have those either two departments linked, and having seen the role of the key role of the leaders within the organisation to promote this kind of inclusive culture. If we look at it from an individual point of view as opposed to an organisational perspective, here we say that where you can be yourself, where you can feel you can go into an organisation and not try to be someone else that you're naturally not, and understanding yourself and understanding that you can feel secure and safe and confident to be able to express your views, to be able to share your experiences, that again will move towards this having this inclusive kind of culture. Understanding what you can bring, whether it's your skills and experiences, and then understanding what can I do and what can I achieve within the context of the organisation I'm working for. Next slide, please. So we started off in the book and in writing the book is understanding very much the kind of challenge that many organizations are facing in this age of diversity. And as I mentioned before, very much this addiction to sameness or to likeness, and very much this kind of homogeneity. So we kind of very much surrounded ourselves by similar people. And one of the ways that has come out of this is so many organizations in the past have tended to recruit people from similar backgrounds and similar universities. I remember the time, which I think to some extent still exists, that many organizations would go on the so-called milk round and go to the same universities and recruit the same people from the same kind of people from the same kind of disciplines, same kind of courses. That is being very much challenged, whereby now organizations, which I'll mention shortly, have kind of widened their talent pool and recognize they need to bring in people from many diverse backgrounds. So in the second half of the book, we then looked at, resolution. And we wanted the book, or to share our experiences, very much of a how-to achieve a diverse workforce, how to get a more kind of inclusive culture. And there's two steps, if you like, that's got to be in place. The first one is if we go to, if you like, conscious leadership. And that's kind of understanding the role of the leader and the role of the management within the organization and the support that they give. And often it might mean changing their behaviors and as role models people kind of look up to within the organization. On top of that, or in addition, you need to kind of look at the processes or the systems, and we call them in the book unconscious nudges, whereby you would constantly be kind of bringing to people's attention, okay, when you are recruiting, what steps are you doing to ensure that you are attracting more diverse workforce, that you are widening the talent pool that you have? And so, when you're learning and development of the promotional system that you may have within your organization, you're constantly looking at the processes and systems to ensure that you can attract and that you can listen to all the voices within your organization. Next slide, please. We consciously wanted to make the book not necessarily just an academic book or lots of models, etc. But we went out and spoke to or referenced around 65 organizations. But as you can see, there's just a handful of them here, both from the kind of public sector like the NHS, the non-for-profit sector like Oxfam, and a range of organizations, whether it's manufacturing, FMCG, kind of financial services, etc., and really kind of interviewing them and asking them where they are within their journey and how relevant it is to have an inclusive workforce and really what role of diversity has within the organization. Next slide, please. This is the diversity, inclusion, maturity model. And in this model, what we're kind of trying to explain where many organizations as a starting point, and we call that diversity 101. And this is very much compliance driven. And it's very much linked to looking at, okay, it's top down, it's authority led, often it's around legal reporting quotas. And that was, for many organizations, that was the starting point. That then shifted to more marketing driven diversity, we call it diversity 2.0. And it's very much kind of influenced by wanting to be seen in a good light around social responsibility, sometimes now called CSR. And very much looking at the image of the company, trying to attract people because it's the kind of organization that they would like to work for. But it's still very much top-down, authority-led, sometimes with this kind of auditing approach. And there could well be some link to some annual report the organization does, what's sometimes called their CSR report or social responsibility report. And then the step where I think most organizations we spoke to are striving, and in many cases, quite honestly, struggling to get to, which we call inclusion 3.0. And that is around diversity as a business strategy, where that diversity and inclusion is embedded within the organization and the processes within it. And the organization can see actual business benefits which I can share later, in terms of by having Inclusion 3.0, this is part of our business strategy, and this will achieve as our business goals and aims. And it's very much also shifting from the top down to bottom up, and recognizing that everybody's voice is being valued and appreciated, creating certain peer group pressures, etc. Next slide, please. One of the points that I picked up in my experiences and being involved in writing the book and talking to now many organizations is the whole issue of bias. And, 98% of all our decision making is made unconsciously. And so we're looking when we're interviewing people, when we're kind of looking at people for promotions, etc., we're making decisions often based around unconscious bias, or that's the way our brain works. And there's lots of research that supports that. And then there's some other biases there around confirmation bias, that even though that we tend to look at evidence or information which somehow confirms what we believe in any case, groupthink and egocentricity. And there's just one example, if you like, of groupthink, when if we go back to some of the organizations that either no longer exist or have really fallen on bad times, was because they had groupthink. And if we go back to the financial kind of crisis in 2008, and if we look at Lehman Brothers, this is well documented that 3 years prior to the crash, a senior manager in Lehman Brothers challenged the groupthink, challenged the way that the organization was going with all eggs in one basket in terms of loans around mortgages, etc. And he said that this is very dangerous. And that senior manager was fired because he was challenging what was then an incredibly successful business in terms of profitability, in terms of share, etc., etc. And there's other example. Just one other example is Kodak. When the Kodak as an organization, they were the first company to develop digital technology around cameras. And in fact, it was rejected by the board of Kodak because their cash cow was film processing. And the last thing they wanted to do was to have digital technology and digital cameras. And we all know now that Kodak are basically out of business. So there's kind of many examples we've talked about in the book. And of course, egocentricity is probably even very highly profiled up there, as well. Decisions are made very much being very self-centered in just looking at an individual's viewpoint. So these kinds of bias, if you put them in the area of talent management and leadership, it's how it affects our decision making. Next slide, please. So finally, and then getting into obviously comments from Laura and then Q&A, is I'd like to kind of share something that we talk about a lot, is this nudges and the good nudge. And if you like, one example of that is WADI, What About Diversity and Inclusion? And a number of companies we've spoken to have actually kind of put them on stickies that they put on phones or around the walls or what have you, to constantly remind people, as an organization, what are we doing and why is it relevant? And what steps can we take as an organization to further promote diversity and inclusion? I think I'll stop there for the moment.
Thanks, Danny. That's great. Really interesting stuff there come out of your book, so I appreciate you sharing that with us. Now we're just going to have a quick chat about the poll results that have come through. So on the question, how well do you feel your organisation is handling and promoting diversity? We've had 50% of respondents say adequately, and 28% say very well, and 22% say not very well. What's your take on those findings, Danny?
I think I'm encouraged by them in terms of 25% saying very well. And as I kind of felt before, that about 50% would say, yeah, we're doing okay, but there's a lot more we can do. But it may be recognizing, yes, we have a diverse workforce, and we have people from different generations, gender, ethnicity within our workforce, but we can do a lot more in terms of to be more inclusive. And of course, still having that significant 25% of people saying, well, I don't think this is a priority for my organisation. I don't think they really see this as a benefit in any way, and it's still a struggle. So there's some big challenges out there still.
Absolutely. I just wanted to go back to a few things that you were talking about in your presentation. You told us about 4 different types of bias that we can all kind of succumb to when it comes to D&I. Which of those would you say is the most dangerous or the most prevalent in organisations?
I would say probably unconscious bias. And I mean, they're all relevant, and whether you look at the world we live in, whether we look at politically or socially, or whether we look at our own organisations, we can all see the biases and the way that decisions are made there. But the fact of the matter is that unconsciously, 98% of our decision making is through a lens of biased in some kind of way in terms of our background, which university we went to, the kind of people we feel comfortable with. So it's kind of recognizing that the decisions are often made around unconsciously, and therefore somehow finding a way to consciously question and challenge what we say and what we do in order to kind of have a much wider perspective.
And does tackling that need to go deeper than running an unconscious bias training session for hiring managers, for example?
There's been a lot of people have said to me, Danny, we do a lot in terms of unconscious bias training and awareness, etc. And of course that's important. But to be honest with you, you're not going to change behaviours just because somebody's been on a one-day training program. And so, in fact, I think there's some research in the States that billions of dollars are spent on training around this topic. But there's been a lot of commentary, a lot of that money is wasted because it's not embedded. They don't kind of really talk about implementation, talking about, as I mentioned before, about the impact of leadership, and then looking at the kind of nudges that are going to be constantly in place to remind us about the way we recruit and develop and the kind of decisions that we make. So yes, I don't want to belittle, or I don't want to say that unconscious bias training is not important. I think it is, but standalone, it's not going to achieve the kind of changes in behaviour that will be necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you also touched on was needing to make D&I part of business strategy. How can HR professionals encourage other leaders in their organisation to see D&I as their responsibility and not just an HR problem?
Well, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that HR face, and it's been said to me in my Panasonic days and since then as well, and saying, well, Danny, this is your responsibility to promote diversity and inclusion. And of course, I say, no, it's not. It's everybody's role and responsibility, and particularly those who are in influential roles about managing leadership. And one of the ways to do that is sometimes when we, together with Steve Frost and myself, or we go into organizations and have opportunities to talk to senior executives about their role, and sometimes even one-to-one through a conversation around coaching and understanding how do they see their role in terms of diversity and inclusion. And just share one little snippet, which I thought was really enlightening, is one senior executive who was probably in his 50s, late 50s. And he said to me that he only really recognized the challenges that face even one looking at gender when his daughter was applying for roles in different organizations, and the fact that she found it so difficult still. And he said, well, why is it difficult? Because once you got into a company, there were some challenges about career planning and promotions, etc., etc. So his eyes were open through his experiences of his daughter. So I think that's just one example of kind of making it individual, making it personal, and trying to have those conversations with influential people in organizations of recognizing the messages that they're sending through the organization, the impact that could have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some great advice. And I think this kind of relates to a question we've had in from Pam, who asks, do you have any tips for an organisation just starting to move to diversity as a business strategy? So I guess those high-level conversations are a great place to start.
Yeah, that would be a starting point. In kind of like many things, understanding where you are today and understanding the kind of workforce, the composition of the workforce, where you are in terms of, if you're looking at the different levels in terms of the mix with gender and ethnicity, and then just, so the starting point is often kind of where are we today, and then kind of saying, okay, where do we want to be as an organisation? And setting maybe, I'm dedicated to quotas, but I'm very firmly kind of on the side of targets and voluntary and transparent targets, and then explaining, understanding, what kind of steps are we going to take as a company to achieve that, and what would be the benefits?
Excellent. So Pam, hope that answers your question. We are getting more questions from you guys coming in, so do keep sending them in through the form you can see on your screen, but we're just going to move on now and come back to those in a bit. Before I hand over to Laura, we have another poll for you to answer. Do you currently have HR software in place to support your diversity strategy? And it's a straight yes or no answer there. Laura, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think organisations are using software as a strategy to support D&I objectives?
I think it can be really useful, and just sort of harkening back to what Danny just said around sort of understanding what your profile is and understanding what your starting point. Without sort of data collection, where do you even begin to know kind of what your situation is, and therefore kind of set reasonable and aspirational targets about where you want to be. So we absolutely rely on our data, and while it's not a numbers game, the numbers are important for you to be able to track change and see where you should be maybe sort of turning your resource. So I think it's really quite important. And obviously we use the Ciphr system. One of the useful things about it is the self-service element, where we've asked people to update their ethnicity or their sexual orientation, for example, and they can go onto the system and do that themselves. So there is that sort of sense of ownership, as well as that kind of feeling like it is confidential and all of those important things about getting people to disclose. So I found it particularly helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't work on stuff that you can't measure, as people always say. So, Laura, you were the recent recipient of the Small Employer of the Year award at the ENEI Awards in recognition of your efforts to build a representative workforce at the Southbank Centre. Can you tell us a little bit more about the measures that earned you this award and what you've learned along the way?
Absolutely. I think for us, it's been a journey, and that's what I would say to everyone on the call who's listening, who's maybe just starting out. We only started our program in 2013, where we sort of looked at our workforce statistics. We felt that our staff wasn't representative of our communities and of our audiences. And so we wrote a strategy, and the aim was to build an organization that understands and values that staff with a diversity of backgrounds, ideas, skills, and experience contribute to greater creativity, which is ultimately our stock in trade. That's what we want to do. We want to make great art for people, and we want them to come here and feel like there's something for them. And so the more diverse that our staff are in terms of making the decisions about what those programs and performances look like, the more that we could appeal to a broader audience and meet the needs of those audiences. And so we looked at our workforce and felt that we needed to take action to address the imbalances in the workforce. And the arts have typically been seen as a white middle-class career choice. For many people, it's seen as quite elitist, or not a career choice at all, a hobby job that people do. And we really wanted to break down those conceptions and open up pathways for people. So in terms of our objectives, we really focused on 4 areas. One was around developing pathways, transparent and accessible pathways to employment, focusing on underrepresented groups. And specifically for us as an organization and across our sector, that's around Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups and people with a disability. Unlike some of the corporates, women are very well represented in the arts, and we actually are in a privileged position where our creative director, our chief exec, and the chair of our board are all women. And we have a great representation of women sort of throughout the management structure. So we could really turn our attention to areas where we felt people were underrepresented. We wanted to create a workplace that embraces and supported the diversity of our people, so essentially to create an inclusive environment. we wanted to develop staff from underrepresented groups to achieve their full potential. So going back to what Danny said, that's about that link between talent and diversity and inclusion. And finally, just to ensure that we integrated and embedded diversity and inclusion into all of our practices and processes to ensure sustainability. So across those 4 objectives, we designed a number of initiatives, programs, and measures. And I think that hopefully is a key takeaway for anyone listening, is that there wasn't one big thing. There isn't one answer to this. We have a huge breadth of things that we do, and it's sort of that little, a number of small initiatives working all together we've been able to realize change. And everything from recruitment, in terms of all the things that you think about, opening up our recruitment pathways, doing things like blind application forms. We now don't give managers names. They don't have any educational information about people. It's all based on their kind of work experience and the personal statement that they need to fill in. We tried to change our messaging on our website to make us look like a place that people wanted to come and work. And we continue to do that with fresh eyes to make sure that we are sort of making people feel like this is somewhere they want to be, and once they're here, that we want to nurture them and help them thrive. Alongside that, we've done mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all of the staff, and that's everyone from the person who sells you an ice cream to the chief executive. And we felt it was really important that we had a shared language and everyone understood what their individual responsibility was in terms of diversity and inclusion, and that it wasn't my job to do diversity to the organization, that it was about everyone's behaviors every day in terms of every interaction that they had with their colleagues and for us members of the public as well. We also do management training, which includes unconscious bias, and I completely agree with Danny that it's not a standalone. That's not going to solve your problem, but it has been really enlightening for people who I think automatically feel like, well, I'm not biased, I'm a good person, I would never do anything like that, to really examine themselves and acknowledge that we all have unconscious bias, and the way around that is to accept it and challenge yourself, and ensure that actually you're not letting that dictate your behaviors in terms of how you recruit people and then how you manage them once they're here. And we also have a management course for people about how to manage a diverse workforce. So it's all well and good recruiting people and getting them in, but when they get here, if it's not a very inclusive environment, what's to motivate people to stay, I suppose. And that's about being genuine and authentic about what we say to the outside world, that we welcome everyone, that we wanted to ensure that our workforce and our environment that people work in absolutely is a place for everyone to feel that they can make a contribution, that their ideas are valued, and that they can be successful. The other thing we did do was set targets, and they were selection and retention targets. I think that it was useful to have them to work towards, and obviously quite satisfying when you meet these things. But for us, they were more of a way to keep us on track rather than something we felt that if we didn't meet them, we'd failed. But it was more about sort of thinking, right, if we're not attracting people, let's go back to what we're doing. Where can we sort of reach out to different people? How can we talk about ourselves differently? So to really sort of just constantly remind ourselves that it's an ongoing piece of work, and we're never finished. As soon as we meet targets, we're sort of setting more aspirational targets. And we have seen change, which, as I say, is gratifying because it means that we're doing some of the right things. But we are certainly on our journey. And I think sort of going back to Danny's slide around, where I would say we're sort of straddling the 2.0 to the 3.0. Our aspiration is to be a very inclusive environment. But there is some way to go there. And we acknowledge that, and we feel like we want to constantly learn from other organizations what they're doing and what programs and initiatives we can put in place to make ourselves the best organization that we can be. We are a charity. We employ around 500 people, so we don't have big resources. We don't have big numbers of people. So we need to be very clever about how we manage our resources, but also how we take the lessons from some big organizations to see, will they work in our context? And sometimes yes, and sometimes that's just not possible. but we're always keen to learn from others and to share our expertise, which is why I was really delighted to be asked to be on the call. And really happy to follow up with anyone sort of who's listening afterwards on an individual basis, because I think that we've all got a lot to learn from each other, and anything that we can do sort of to collectively to move all of our organizations to be inclusive workplaces is a fantastic achievement. And so if we can do that together, that would be amazing.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Laura. I'm sure people will be taking you up on that offer, because I'm sure everyone here on the call is keen to learn. Just picking up some of the things you were talking about, I mean, it sounds like you're doing some amazing work. That you're supporting managers with information about how to manage a diverse workforce. And I was kind of wondering what kind of things those courses covered, and what kind of challenges that having a diverse workforce might present to a manager. I mean, one that's off the top of my head is if you have people with diversity of thought, and they're creative people, as they might be in your environment, then it's more likely maybe to lead to creative differences and arguments, and they may need smoothing over a bit more.
In terms of things that we cover, we wanted to make it really practical, because I think some of the rhetoric around diversity and inclusion is actually very theoretical about how, we should all welcome everyone. It's like, well, what does that actually mean when you're sitting in a meeting and you've got people who are dominating, or people who don't feel like they can make a contribution because you've got some groupthink and they don't want to be the one who challenges. So the types of things that we talk about to managers are around ensuring that people have a voice, and doing that in a really practical way, properly facilitating meetings, ensuring that people are engaging, and that you are facilitating and getting people to come to a consensus in terms of moving forward. And it's not just the loudest or the most established staff who then subsequently carry the day. And also about, that diversity means a lot of things. We talk a lot about social mobility here as well, and that we are bringing in people who have different backgrounds and come with different perspectives, and use different language and approach problems in a different way. And so to be mindful that actually different isn't wrong, and in fact different is good, and that's something that we should be embracing. So there's a lot around facilitation and negotiation, and in terms of a manager's role, I suppose, once they've got people in their team, to make sure that people feel that they can contribute and thrive.
That's great. Thanks very much. That's really interesting. I have a question from, and I'm going to pronounce your name wrong, sorry, Adifi. What practical steps, Laura, did you take to change the messaging on your website to change the external view and encourage more inclusivity and sort of promote that message to potential candidates?
Well, we read our website and we thought, this is not us. It was fine. It was very much, as you'd expect, a kind of boilerplate text. And we thought, it's not warm, it's not friendly. And as an organization, that is actually, in fact, what we are. So we worked with marketing to say, look, this doesn't work for us from a recruitment perspective. We wanted to take ownership of all of the content on our recruitment pages, and they let us do that. And so now we write all of our own text. And so we sat down and thought, well, what do we want people to know? When they come to the Work For Us section, what is it going to say? Is it going to speak to people? So we made it about, like, this is a great place. It's really fast-paced. We make art for everyone, so we welcome applications from everyone. So, have a look and see what you think just after the call, www.southbankcentre.co.uk. And I think that's really helped us in terms of people kind of getting a sense of what it's like to be here. We tried to be really honest as well. We are a small number of staff for the kind of output that we do. So it is a very chaotic, hectic, fast-paced organization. And if that's not the place for you, then it's probably not worth sort of progressing your application. But if you thrive on, being busy and excited and making a contribution, then we are absolutely the place for you. We also decided that we had to challenge managers about where we advertised. There were some default positions, places that everyone wanted to advertise. And we thought, no, we need to make more use of social media, of our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as our local community partners. So we send a lot of job alerts to local charities, local job centres, other organisations that work in our sector to say, do you want to send it out to the people in your sort of networks? So we tried to do a sort of multi-prong approach to make sure that our messages were getting out much further than they used to be, and that has definitely made a difference in terms of numbers of applications and the diversity of the people who are making those applications.
Excellent, thanks very much. Next, I have a couple of questions from people about your data collection. So I'm going to group these together. Frederick asks, were there any barriers you encountered when asking people to disclose things such as their ethnicity? He ran a pilot scheme and it was viewed with skepticism by employees. And Karen asks, how can you encourage staff to update their diversity data and sort of avoid getting a slew of boxes checked not specified?
Really good questions. In terms of barriers, I think it's always a challenge that people don't want to disclose because they feel that it invades their privacy somehow. And we worked on very careful communications to sort of explain to people why we wanted to know. And for us, it's a couple of reasons. One, we are a charity. We need to report this information to our funders. They give us 40% of our funding. They want to know. So as an organization, we have an obligation to tell them as much as we possibly can. The reason they want to know is they want to make sure that we are representative of the societies that we are serving and of the community that we're based in. And so I think it was the messaging about why we wanted to know and then what we were going to do with the data, which for us, it's simply an opportunity to track and see if there are areas where we feel that there are problems, so people are being discriminated against based on their gender, based on their ethnicity, based on their disability. So to look at patterns. And so in a way, we're basically saying we want the data so we can make sure that we are actually who we say we are as an organization, and we want the data to make sure that there's no hidden problems that we're not seeing. And this is a way for those to be sort of visible to us, and then we can tackle them. So I think that messaging is really important. We absolutely have a prefer not to say option, and people do exercise that. But hopefully over time, I think because we've sort of been working on improving our data collection for the last couple of years, people do see that we are using the data sensibly. We're not doing anything untoward with it, and building up that trust. So people have been filling it in. I think sexual orientation was a real challenge for us. The Arts Council wanted us to collect it. So now all new starters sort of have that option, but for the rest of our staff, they had to go into their self-service account via Ciphr and put that in themselves, and a lot of people haven't done that. So again, we're sort of trying to think about another way to do that. One of the things that we've recently done is we were in the Pride Parade as a way to kind of demonstrate to our staff that actually we are an organization that supports the LGBT community, and obviously, we welcome them telling us about their sexuality, and again, we want to know that information to make sure that there's no hidden biases happening in the organization that we don't know about.
Absolutely, yeah. I think sexual orientation is still one of those areas that people are still really reluctant to disclose at work. I've heard often quoted statistics that about 2/3 of university graduates go back into the closet at work after graduation, which is quite scary in this day and age, that they feel like they can't or don't want to share that information with their employer, that they may think that it will have a detrimental effect on joining the workforce. So I'm just going to spin back to the poll question we asked you earlier, which was, do you currently have HR software in place to support your diversity strategy? We have a really neat 50-50 split, yes or no. Laura, what's your take on that?
Well, I suppose for the 50% who are not doing it, I'd just be really curious to see how they are sort of tracking and measuring, and if numbers is a way to get buy-in in their organization as well. That's something really to think about. In terms of big organizations, if you're sort of fighting for budget and fighting for a seat at that top table to make diversity a priority, it is really good to be able to say, and this is what our workforce looks like now.
Okay, thanks very much. So now we're entering the last 15 minutes of the webinar, which is absolutely your time to get your questions answered by Danny and Laura. So do keep sending them in through the screen, the form at the bottom of the screen. And if there's anything you're missing, you're not able to scribble down while we're talking, don't worry, you'll be able to watch this on demand at your leisure. You'll get emailed a link to it, which you can watch whenever you like or share with a colleague. So Danny, I'd like to bring you in to a question which is sort of off the back of your presentation earlier. Rachel says that she agrees that the impact of training is limited on challenging unconscious bias. What kind of things could go into a nudge strategy to kind of tackle this?
Yeah, so there's been when we spoke to organisations, what they wanted to do, they examined their kind of recruitment practices. And they looked at, I think Laura mentioned this, in terms of challenging and questioning by always going to the same media or going to the same source. Then, surprise, surprise, you get similar kind of people responding. So one of the ways is really just have a fresh look at the way that you kind of look for talent coming from different places, whether it's through your website, whether it's through different media. And just to give you one example, there was an organization called, it's in the book we wrote back, called Arctic Shores. And they actually have developed under gamification a process that by playing as part of the recruitment process, and a number of organizations have bought into this, by part of the recruitment process, the individual plays a game, and the decisions that they make in the game are matched to the competences that the organization is looking for. And this is, again, just looking at a wide range of ways to try to find those kind of people, whether it's the creativity, people are thinking differently. And I remember them, the MD of the company, saying that a particular young lady, I think it was in Northern Ireland, the way that she responded to the decision she made in the game actually influenced the organization to interview her. Otherwise, that her educational background and qualifications would not have ticked the relevant boxes, and she turned out to be one of the best recruits they ever made. So I think it's just looking at your recruitment methodology and tools, and even looking to things like who's doing the interviewing. And if you have got a panel interviews, a number of organizations would ensure that it's mixed, the gender is mixed in terms of the interview panel. As Laura said, things like taking away age or gender from CVs. You know, there's some research even around ethnicity where showed that two people with, I think one was called Alison Taylor and one was called Miriam Mahmood, and they sent identical CVs to 16 organizations, and I think Miriam Mahmood got one interview and Alison got 9. So there's so much bias out there, so it's continuously looking at the processes that you have around that, and then of course then looking at things like the way that you decide on development activities around your promotions, and the kind of looking at the people, if you have a succession plan, who's in the relevant spots. And in terms of maybe there could be certain people within your companies who have got certain biases, or kind of always tend to prefer people that they know from certain backgrounds or come recommended, and questioning that as well. And then finally, when you're looking at retention, looking at very much about what you're doing to retain the talents that you have within the organization, and kind of questioning again, what are you doing to ensure that people do feel comfortable and welcome and safe, and if you like, part of the family. And so really just looking at all those processes within the company and constantly asking the question of what are we doing to look at our diversity and inclusive culture, and that's why we call them nudges.
Lovely, thanks, Danny. Rachel, hopefully that answers your question. And Laura, I have one for you from Kirsten that builds on that quite nicely. Did you make any changes to your assessment process? I mean, obviously we've touched on blind CVs, but were there anything else you changed?
What we've tried to do was encourage managers to look at a competencies-based system, and we've given them some guidelines in terms of sample questions that they could be asking, because we felt that actually gave people a better opportunity to shine, and it wouldn't be necessarily based on their absolute experience doing the exact same job somewhere else at a very similar organization, and it allowed people to kind of demonstrate transferable skills. The other thing that we've tried to do is introduce an element of testing to really give people, I suppose, a different opportunity to show their abilities. I personally think that that's been extremely useful, because some people who have maybe, come across okay in an interview have actually really done amazingly well on a test that's absolutely what they're going to be doing day to day in terms of its relationship. So that actually was really important. And it meant about investing a little bit more time up front, but actually getting better hires off the back of it. And we do always have panel interviews here. We think it's really important that there are a couple people in the room, and that those things are standardized to a point, in the sense that every applicant gets asked the same questions in the same way by the same panel, and that there is a sort of triangulation of doing a test as well alongside their application form and the interview to decide who the best person is for the role.
Great, thank you very much, Kirsten. Hope that answers your question. I have another one for you, Laura, from Sandra, who asked, have you seen any improvements to staff engagement data or qualitative feedback as a result of your D&I strategy?
Well, I would love to say yes, but the truth is that we have not had a staff survey in the organisation for some time. We've currently just appointed a new chief exec who's been in the role for about 8 weeks. And so we're really hoping under this new leadership that actually we'll be able to push that through. Because in terms of like what the staff think about our diversity program, it's all anecdotal, which is not ideal at all. I would love to be kind of getting a real sense of it from people, because while we think we might be doing a good job, we don't know, and that doesn't sit very comfortably with me.
Okay, well, that's one thing to tackle in the future. And Danny, I wondered, from your experience, is it quite difficult to show if D&I strategies are having a direct impact on staff engagement?
Well, I think there's two aspects on that. Of course, there's the survey, whether it's an annual survey, quarterly survey, which would respond to that. And there's other actions that organisations have taken, whether it's the around the orientation or the induction processes, making people feel that genuinely welcome and they can kind of listen to their voices. And I remember when talking to one of the leaders of a very large firm of chartered accountants, in fact, the MD, she said to me that one of the things that she recognised was the fact that it was always the same people who were speaking up. And when we look at diversity, I mean, you can visualize diversity, but one thing you can't visualize is extroversion, introversion. And she just really wanted to create a platform, a way that people, who are maybe introverts, or maybe shy, maybe quiet, who don't have the confidence maybe to speak up, have an opportunity to express their views and opinions. And of course, things like this, the annual survey is one example of that. But things like having some online tool or chat or a way through organisations' intranet, people can express their views and opinions, and I think that's another way as well.
Excellent, thanks very much. So we're just entering the final few minutes of the webinar. So if you have any more lingering questions, please do send them through and we'll try to cover them before our time is up. And one question that I wanted to put to both of our speakers was about employee networks, which we haven't actually touched upon yet. I was reading an article in Bloomberg Business Week yesterday, which said that Deloitte in the US is actually going to start disbanding its employee networks, which have been in place for them for more than 20 years, and replace them with inclusion councils, the thought being that employee networks actually exclude the people, generally the older white men, who have the power to actually make a difference on D&I in organisations. And the idea behind the councils would be that it would bring together people from the different minorities as well as senior leaders who would be able to move the agenda forward. And I wonder, Danny, first of all, what's your take on that kind of idea of moving away from networks? Do you think they're still valid?
The answer is yes, I believe they are still valid. And I would think that each organisation needs to, whatever's going to work best within the culture of the company, And if they've got really well supported and really influential kind of networks there, I certainly personally wouldn't feel they should kind of disband them and create something else. Having said all that, if you're in an organization that maybe the networks, they ran their course, that people are not joining, that you're not really getting any benefits from them, then for sure, try something different. And if that's going to be some kind of inclusive councils or a different way, then I think you've really got to look at it in the context of your organisation and what's going to work best.
Okay, thanks very much. Laura, do you have a view on this?
I agree with Danny. I do think there is a place for them. I have worked in organisations in the past where they have been really quite powerful. We actually don't have any employee networks at Southbank Centre, and that's a decision that's been made by employees. We go out periodically to say, do people want to get engaged, do they want to get involved? And in an organisation of 500 people, we had 2 positive responses of people who actually wanted to to come to a network or to somehow engage with a network. And I don't know why that is. It could be just, it's an issue of scale, that in an organization of this size, there isn't enough people to populate a network, that it could be an issue of people actually feel like they can be themselves at work, so they don't feel that need to seek out people who are like them. It's an ongoing question for us, because other organizations in the arts do actually have networks. And they do work quite well, but they tend to be much, much, much larger organizations. So I think for us as an organization, what works for us is putting it out to employees periodically, supporting them if they want to do it, but respecting that if they don't want to do it, it's not something we're going to impose top down.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I have another question for you, Danny, from Catherine, who asks, have you explored the concept of cultural intelligence and diversity? Do you think this has a role to play in how employees respond to diversity initiatives, team working, and the beneficial outcomes of D&I strategies?
I missed the very beginning of the question, Catherine.
Okay, sorry, no problem. Catherine asks, have you explored the concept of cultural intelligence in relation to diversity in organisations? Do you think this has a role to play in how employees respond to D&I initiatives?
Sure. Okay, well, actually, it's quite relevant, having worked for a Japanese company for so many years, and for 21 years, and then having a global role, I could certainly see the benefits, and from a business perspective as well, of having a diverse workforce, or even having a diverse kind of team. And I can give you just a very quick example whereby, and again through some research in the book, a firm was pitching for some business. And it was actually pitching to an organization, a manufacturing-based organization. And the MD of the company actually said, within the kind of market development team that always goes out to pitch for business, to what extent have you got anybody who's got any manufacturing experience? And the answer was nobody. So they drafted somebody in from within the company whose background was manufacturing. And I was told that, as they think that as one of the reasons why they won that business, because people were kind of tuned in to the culture of this manufacturing company. They could respond to their questions. They could recognize what were the kind of challenges they were facing. And so the kind of cultural awareness, and put it in the context of business and winning business, I think can have an enormous impact.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Danny. And Laura, I've had a couple of people asking how they can get in touch with you. Are you on social media, or is email a good option for you?
I am on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way for anyone to find me, because my email address is enormous. I am the only Laura Popazzi in the country, so I'm not hard to find.
Okay, that's excellent. And Danny, where can we find more about you?
Okay, so again, LinkedIn. And I'm very happy to kind of answer any further questions about the experiences of both writing the book and subsequently talking to organizations in workshops and seminars about diversity and inclusion, and really challenging them, their thought processes. And as we said before, many of them are trying to get to that inclusion 3.0, somehow struggling. And I'm really happy for people to kind of ask me questions and share my experiences and get in touch with me through LinkedIn.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. I already know Danny and Laura are going to catch up offline after this call and try to figure out some ways they can work together. So do get in touch with them if you have any more questions. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but I hope you've found the session useful and interesting. Thank you to Danny and Laura for taking part and sharing their expertise with us. And thank you to you, our audience, for listening and taking part. Thanks also to our sponsors, Ciphr, for partnering with us. As a reminder, this webinar will be available on demand, so please do share it with your colleagues, and we hope you'll join us on a future webinar. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.